You know, people look at these old hands, covered in liver spots and crisscrossed with veins like a roadmap of my years, and they think they know my story. They hear my voice, a little thinner now, and they pat my arm, assuming the tales I tell are just memories softened by time. But the deepest marks on a person aren't the wrinkles you can see. They are the invisible fractures, the ones that spiderweb across your soul when the person you love most in the world decides to break you. The sound that wakes me in the dead of night isn't a thunderclap or a siren. It's something much quieter and 1,000 times more chilling. It is the soft, metallic click of a walk-in refrigerator door. The sound of my world being sealed shut, not in a blaze of glory, but in a slow, creeping cold. A cold orchestrated by the very hands I once taught to knead dough, by the boy whose scraped knees I bandaged. My son. He was more than my child. He was the heir to everything my husband and I had built. And he stood on the other side of that door, glancing at his Rolex, waiting for the cold to silence the heart that had only ever beat for him. This isn't just a story I'm telling. It's a promise I made to myself in the freezing dark. It's the truth I clawed my way back to the light to share. It is a truth that deserves to be heard. If you're listening, no matter where you are, please subscribe and leave a comment, because some stories need to be shared, even if they make you question everything. Some truths, no matter how cold, must be told. We started with nothing but a bag of flour and a dream, my Arthur and me. From dawn till dusk, we worked. I was the one with the recipes, the magic touch with the sourdough starter, while he charmed the customers and handled the books. We grew slowly but surely with every penny we saved and every ounce of sweat we poured into that little bakery. People said I could tell the day's earnings just by the weight of the cash box at closing time. Then the children arrived. First Thomas, then Eleanor, and finally Samuel. Thomas, my eldest, he was drawn to the business from the start. He'd be right there at my elbow, wanting to count the change, learning to weigh the ingredients. A clever boy with a quick mind. My heart would just about burst with pride watching him. He's going to be a great man, I'd tell Arthur. And he was, just not the kind of great I ever could have imagined. I remember once, he couldn't have been more than 10. He traded his entire comic book collection to another kid for a single, rare edition. When I found out the other boy had been crying, I told Thomas to trade back. He just gave me that smile of his, the one that could melt butter, and said, "But Mom," he wanted the deal. Business is business. At the time, I just shook my head, thinking it showed a sharp mind for negotiation. Looking back now, I see it for what it was. The first small spark of a fire that would one day try to burn my world to the ground. It's always in these small, overlooked moments that a person's true character is forged. Margaret saw ambition then, but that spark was about to ignite a betrayal of unimaginable proportions. Stick with us to see how deep the rot truly goes. How was I to know? When you look at the child you raised, the one you taught to say please and thank you don't see the capacity for evil. You see his potential, you see his drive, and you pray it leads him down the right path. A mother's hope can be a powerful thing, but sometimes it can blind you to the truth right in front of you. The years flew by. The single bakery became a neighborhood cafe. The cafe grew into a small chain, and before we knew it, we had 12 hearth and home bakeries dotted across eastern Pennsylvania. It was all elbow grease, you know. Nothing was ever handed to us. I'd be up at 4 a.m. checking the first batches of bread, and I wouldn't stop until my bones ached. But we loved it. It was our life, built one brick, one loaf at a time. My dear Arthur, bless his soul, passed on 6 years ago. A sudden stroke took my best friend of 52 years in an instant. He was in his favorite chair reading the paper like he did every morning, and he was just gone. When Thomas called to tell me, I didn't need to hear the words. I felt it. I felt the silence where his heart used to beat. It's a strange connection you have after a lifetime together. You just know. Many people expected me to sell the business. Margaret, you've earned your rest, they'd say, as if retirement was a mandatory sentence for turning 75. Nonsense. I was 75 with a mind as sharp as a bread knife. I knew every corner of that business. So I decided to carry on. For me, for Arthur, for the story we had written together. Here we see the foundation of Margaret's character. Where others saw an old woman who should gracefully exit, she saw a legacy worth protecting. This fierce determination is the very thing that will be tested in the coldest crucible imaginable. Of course, Thomas was right there by my side. My eldest, with his fancy business degrees, had been our CFO for a decade. He was a pillar of the community, a family man married to a lovely girl, Sarah, with 2 beautiful children, Leo and Mia. "Mom, you don't have to worry about a thing," he'd say, with a smile that was so much like his father's it made my heart ache. And like a fool, I trusted him. The first year after Arthur's passing was a blur. The grief was a heavy cloak, and the weight of the business felt immense. But Thomas was there, my rock, handling the numbers while I focused on keeping the heart of our bakeries beating. Or so I believed. I should have paid more attention. The small things. The way he'd quickly close a laptop when I entered his office. The new suppliers he hired without discussion. The hushed phone calls that ended abruptly when I was near. I've always been a person who believes in the good of people. I believed in a person's word, in the strength of a handshake. And most of all, I believed in my own son. Who could ever imagine that the little boy who used to steal cookies from the cooling rack would one day be stealing the minutes of my life, waiting for my heart to freeze inside a walk-in refrigerator? I remember the day as if it were etched in ice. It was a Wednesday. I had gone to our central commissary in Allentown for a routine quality check. I like to do it every month, to chat with the bakers, to taste the new recipes, to keep my finger on the pulse of it all. Thomas insisted on joining me. He said he was concerned I was overdoing it, that I shouldn't be on my feet all day. I thought it was just a son looking out for his mother. What a blind old fool I was. I'd asked Clara, our head pastry chef and one of my most trusted employees for over 30 years, to walk through with us. We were in the pastry section when he pointed to the large walk-in refrigerator. "Mom, something's wrong with the thermostat in here. The creams aren't setting right." Clara and I stepped into that vast, cold space without a hint of suspicion. It was a huge room where we stored our most delicate creations, the cakes, the custards, the fresh berries. We had just stepped over the threshold when I felt a hard shove from behind. As I stumbled forward, I heard Clara cry out. I turned just in time to see Thomas's face. But it wasn't his face. It was a mask of cold ambition. There was a look in his eyes I'd never seen before. Hard, empty, and calculating. Before I could utter a word, the heavy insulated door swung shut with a muffled boom, plunging us into the dim, cold light. The sound of that door locking is a sound that will haunt me for the rest of my days. It's the most dreadful sound I've ever known. Worse than the screech of tires in the car accident that nearly took my Eleanor in '98. Worse than the doctor's solemn voice telling me Arthur was gone. It is the sound of absolute betrayal. For the first few moments, I was convinced it was a mistake. I banged on the door. I yelled his name. The chill was already seeping into my thin cardigan. I only realized it was deliberate when I heard his voice, faint, through the thick insulation. "I'm sorry, Mom. This is for the best. It won't take long." And then, the sound of his footsteps walking away. At first, you lose all sense of time. I couldn't tell if it had been minutes or hours. The doctors at the hospital later told me we were in there for nearly 8 hours. 8 hours of pounding on that door until my knuckles were bruised and bleeding. My voice was gone from screaming. The cold. Oh, the cold. It started in my toes, a painful tingling, then it crawled up my legs, into my arms, until my whole body felt like it was being pricked by a million tiny frozen needles. But the physical agony was nothing compared to the storm raging in my mind. Why? The question screamed in the frosty silence. Why? Had I not loved him enough? Had I pushed him too hard? Had all my lessons about honesty and hard work been twisted into this grotesque ambition? The questions were like shards of ice, tearing me apart. For a moment, I just wanted to give up, to lie down on the cold floor and let the memories of Arthur carry me away. But then, something else stirred deep inside me. It wasn't hope. It was rage. Pure, unadulterated rage. This is where the story turns. In that freezing, desperate place, it's not a gentle hope that sparks a will to survive. It's a burning, defiant anger. That rage becomes a furnace against the cold, and it's about to fuel a fight to live that Thomas never anticipated. He would not write the final page of my story. I would not allow his greed to be the epitaph on the legacy Arthur and I had built. That anger was my warmth. I started reciting recipes to keep my mind sharp. I mentally calculated the ingredient costs for 1,000 croissants. I named every single employee who worked for us, anything to keep my brain from freezing, but it was getting so hard. My thoughts were thick and slow, like molasses in winter. My eyelids felt like they had weights on them. My body ached, and then, terrifyingly, it stopped aching. When the pain of the cold goes away, that's when you know hypothermia is winning. After a while, the hallucinations began. I saw Arthur clear as day, standing by a rack of cooling pies, holding his hand out to me. I saw my children as toddlers, running and laughing between the steel shelves. I saw my own mother, gone for 40 years, sitting on a sack of flour, humming a lullaby. It was so vivid I reached out to touch her. That's when I knew I was dying. It's true what they say, you know. Your life really does flash before your eyes. I remembered meeting Arthur at a church social in Scranton. I was 19, he was 21. I remembered the birth of Thomas, the weight of him in my arms, that first fierce wave of a mother's love. Our first little bakery, the move to Harrisburg, the family picnics with everyone together. It all played out in my mind as the cold slowly claimed me. I was barely conscious when I heard a scraping sound at the door. I thought it was another vision, but then a sliver of light cut through the dimness, followed by a gasp. It was Marco, the young man on the night cleaning crew. He'd heard a faint rhythmic banging I didn't even realize I was still making, my fist weakly hitting a metal tray against a shelf. By a twist of fate or an act of God, I don't know which, he decided to investigate. I don't remember much of the rescue, just flashes, people yelling, the wail of sirens, urgent voices. I remember a paramedic saying my core temperature was 81 degrees, dangerously low. I remember the doctor in the ER talking about a fighting spirit, and I remember with chilling clarity Thomas's face as he burst into my hospital room. The flicker of shock, of pure disbelief, of fear in his eyes when he realized I was still alive. I was in the hospital for a month. A nasty case of pneumonia, frostbite on my fingers and toes, a strain on my heart. The doctors kept saying it was a miracle a woman of 76 could survive that long in such conditions. I knew what it was. Sheer stubbornness. I've always been as stubborn as a mule, Arthur used to say. It was that stubbornness that saved me. The whole time, Thomas was the perfect, doting son. He never left my bedside. He told everyone I must have accidentally gotten locked in while checking stock, a tragic accident due to a faulty lock. He even had tears in his eyes, and they looked so real. I almost started to believe I'd imagined it all, that the cold and the trauma had made me delirious. Until one evening, when he thought I was asleep, he leaned in close to my ear and whispered, "You should have just died. Next time you will." That was the moment I knew. I wasn't going to scream or accuse him. Not yet. I was going to play his game. I would pretend my memory was hazy, that the hypothermia had left me confused. I was going to bide my time, because now I knew. My son, my own flesh and blood, wanted me dead. And I had to find out exactly why. The full reason came to light when my youngest, Samuel, who worked as an analyst in our main office, came to see me. He came late at night, when he knew Thomas would be gone. He was carrying a briefcase. "Mom," he said, his voice shaking, "I've been looking into the books. Something's not right. I think Thomas has been siphoning money for years, and since Dad's been gone, it's gotten so much worse." It felt like a physical blow. My son wasn't just a murderer. He was a thief, stealing from his own family. The documents showed it all. Fake invoices, transfers to shell companies, millions of dollars vanishing into thin air, all so cleverly hidden that only someone looking for it would ever find it. He knew I was getting close, Samuel told me. He reassigned me to a dead-end project, said it was corporate restructuring, but I didn't stop digging. "Mom, there's something else. I found a life insurance policy. A huge one, taken out in your name just a month before the accident. Thomas is the only beneficiary." Lying there in that hospital bed, my body still screaming from the cold that nearly took me, I made a promise to myself. I would not cry, I would not fall apart. I would be strategic. I would be intelligent. The same way I built an empire from a single bag of flour. I was going to expose the person who tried to tear it all down, even if it was my own son, especially because it was my own son. Now, as I sit here in my favorite armchair, looking at the little porcelain bluebird on my mantel, a silly thing I bought to remind me of the cold, I think about the strange paths life takes. The same woman who learned to bake from her grandmother, who raised 3 children to believe in the value of an honest day's work, who built a beloved chain of bakeries across the state, was nearly left to freeze to death, betrayed by the one she loved most. But my story doesn't end in that cold, dark place. No, what I did after I left that hospital, that's the real story. How I pretended to be weak while I gathered my strength. How I used his arrogance against him. How I orchestrated my own brand of justice. A justice served just as cold as the refrigerator where he left me to die. But wait, I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand what happened next, you have to understand how it all began. Because a man doesn't just wake up one day and decide to kill his mother. It's a rot that starts small. A story that began long before that refrigerator door ever clicked shut. Thomas was always a gifted child, the one all the teachers raved about. He had a natural head for numbers. As a boy, he had 3 separate piggy banks, one for candy, one for toys, and one he labeled investments. When he was 18, he didn't even need a push. He went straight to college for a business degree, specializing in finance. "Mom, I'm going to help Dad turn our little bakery into an empire," he'd say, with a fire in his eyes. And for a long time, he did just that. After graduation, he came into the business like a whirlwind, full of new ideas. He streamlined our ordering systems, modernized our payroll, and convinced Arthur to expand into 2 neighboring cities. He was the one who pushed for a centralized website with online ordering when that was still a new concept for businesses like ours. "We have to look to the future," he'd say, and we were so proud, we just applauded everything he did. In time, he became Arthur's right-hand man. He was officially named CFO in 2012, but he'd been managing the finances for years before that. Arthur trusted him completely. "The boy has my business sense and his mother's grit," my husband would boast to his buddies at the golf club, and my heart would swell. When Arthur passed in 2019, it was only natural for Thomas to step up and take on more. I could have sold the company. I had plenty of offers, very good ones, but those bakeries were our life, Arthur's and mine. You don't just sell off 50 years of your soul. Besides, I always knew I would pass it on to the children. To all of them, of course, but Thomas was the one who lived and breathed the business. "Don't you worry, Mom. You just enjoy your retirement. I've got this," he'd tell me during those first few months of my widowhood. At first, his help was a godsend. I was drowning in grief. I didn't have the energy for spreadsheets and supplier negotiations. I let Thomas handle the business side while I did what I loved most, spending time on the bakery floors, talking to the customers, making sure the quality of our scones never wavered. The first hint that something was amiss came about a year after Arthur's death. It was subtle, the kind of thing you dismiss at first. Thomas started canceling our weekly financial review meetings. "I'm slammed, Mom. Let me just get these reports cleaned up for you. We'll go over everything next week." It was always some excuse. When we did finally meet, the reports he showed me were more and more simplified. "Just the top-line numbers so you don't have to strain yourself," he'd say, as if I were a dotty old woman who couldn't read a balance sheet. Me, who for 50 years had accounted for every last cent. But I let it go, telling myself he was just trying to protect me. Right. But alone in my quiet house at night, doubt began to creep in. I'd sit in Arthur's big leather chair, holding a pillow, and wonder. Was I being overly suspicious because I was old? Was my grief making me paranoid? That feeling of uncertainty was almost worse than knowing the truth. I felt like I'd not only lost my husband, but my own confidence, my own sharp mind. This is the insidious nature of betrayal, isn't it? That creeping doubt that makes you question your own sanity before you can even begin to accept the terrible truth about someone you love. Margaret is at a turning point, and the choice she makes will determine everything. You see, it's the hardest thing in the world to believe the worst of your own child. You make excuses. You tell yourself you're imagining things, that you're being unfair. You grab on to any other possible explanation, because facing the truth is a pain beyond measure. It was a kind of prison, long before I was ever locked in that refrigerator. It was in one of those brief meetings that I saw the first real red flag. A sudden, unexplained 25% drop in profits at our most successful location in downtown Philadelphia. "Thomas, what's happened here?" I asked. "I was there just last week and the line was out the door." He didn't miss a beat. "It's the new competitor down the street, Mom, and the city did that road work for a few weeks, which hurt foot traffic." But it didn't add up. The new competitor was a small cupcake shop, and the road work had only lasted a week. It couldn't account for a quarterly drop like that. But again, I let it slide. Maybe I was wrong. Then other things started happening. Trusted, long-term managers were suddenly let go. "Just some necessary restructuring," he'd say. Our local, family-owned dairy supplier was replaced by a massive, faceless corporation from out of state. "They gave us a better price," was the reason. The pile of documents he needed my signature on grew taller, and the time he gave me to read them grew shorter. "It's just legal boilerplate, Mom. I've already vetted it all for you." One afternoon, walking past his office, I heard him in a heated discussion with Samuel, my youngest. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was sharp and angry. When the door flew open, Samuel came storming out, his face flushed, brushing past me without a word. Thomas appeared a moment later, straightening his tie, a sure sign he was agitated. "Everything all right, son?" I asked. "Just a disagreement, Mom. Samuel is getting bogged down in details, seeing problems where there are none. It's handled." The very next day, I learned Samuel had been promoted to oversee a new, vaguely defined logistics project that had him working from home, effectively isolating him from the central office. It felt wrong, but once more I pushed my suspicions down. It was around then I noticed Sarah, my daughter-in-law, starting to pull away. We'd always been friendly. She used to bring the grandchildren over for Sunday dinner every week. Suddenly the visits stopped. She always had an excuse. The kids had soccer practice. She had a commitment with her sister. Thomas wasn't feeling well. The grandchildren, too, became distant. Leo, who always ran to give me a big hug, would now just mumble a hello. Mia, my little baker in training, suddenly decided she was too old to decorate cookies with her grandma. That hurt more than the business worries. My family was my everything. One rainy Saturday, feeling lonely in my big house, I decided to finally clean out Arthur's old home office, a room I hadn't touched since he died. As I was sorting through drawers, I found an old leather-bound ledger. Inside, in Arthur's meticulous handwriting, was a complete list of all our family's assets, updated just a month before he passed. Properties, investment accounts, shares in other local businesses, everything was there. Just for my own peace of mind, I started comparing it to the recent financial summaries Thomas had given me. My blood ran cold. Several major assets were completely missing from Thomas's reports. A commercial property we owned in a rapidly developing neighborhood, and a large portfolio of municipal bonds Arthur called our rainy day fund. I'm not a fool. I didn't get where I am by being naive. I knew in that moment what my heart had been refusing to see. My son was stealing from me. Instead of confronting him, I decided to play the fool a little longer. I needed proof, undeniable proof. The next morning, I feigned a dizzy spell and had my driver take me to the main office an hour before anyone else arrived. I used my old master key to let myself into Thomas's office. I'm not proud of it, but it had to be done. His computer was password protected, but I wasn't looking for digital files. I went to his filing cabinet, the one marked private. I searched through files until I found one labeled corporate restructuring. My hands were trembling as I opened it. It was all there. Documents showing the sale of the missing commercial property, not to a third party, but transferred for a fraction of its value to a holding company called TR Investments. It didn't take a genius to figure out those initials. Thomas Robert. My son's name, on the paperwork that was robbing me blind. That is the moment the ground beneath your feet disappears. It's one thing to suspect, to worry. It's another to see it in black and white, to see the signature of the child you raised on a document of pure betrayal. A simple piece of paper can be the cruelest weapon of all. In that quiet office, it wasn't just ink. It was the final, devastating proof that the son I knew was gone, and I was utterly alone in this fight. The air just leaves your body. It's not just a business document. It's the death certificate for the relationship you cherished most. The world you thought you knew crumbles to dust, and you're left standing in the ruins all by yourself. He was systematically transferring family assets to a company that was entirely his. I dug deeper and found more. Inflated invoices to suppliers I'd never heard of, consulting contracts for millions of dollars with firms that didn't seem to exist. He was bleeding the company dry, preparing to take it all for himself. I took photos of everything with my phone, put the folder back exactly as I'd found it, and left before the first employees started to arrive. My heart felt like it had been shattered into a million pieces, but my mind was clearer than it had been in years. I had the proof. Now I needed a strategy. I needed help from someone I could trust completely, someone who understood the numbers but was outside the company. I thought of Walter, a retired CPA who had been Arthur's best friend since childhood. I called him that same day, and we met for coffee at his home, far from any prying eyes. Walter was aghast as I showed him the photos and laid out my suspicions. "Margaret, this is more than just skimming off the top. This is a deliberate, methodical plan to bankrupt the company," he said after an hour of studying the documents. "He's moving the valuable assets out, leaving the shell with all the debt. This is how a hostile takeover works, except he's doing it from the inside." Bankrupt. The word was like a punch to the stomach. The business Arthur and I had poured our lives into, the jobs of over 300 employees, our family's legacy, was being systematically murdered by our own son. "There's more," Walter said, pointing to a document. "This power of attorney document here, disguised as a routine update, it basically signs over your entire voting majority to him. If you sign this, it's over. You become a figurehead with no actual power." I remembered a thick document Thomas had left for me to sign the week before, saying I would get to it when I had time. Now I understood his persistent calls, asking if I had signed it yet. "And the worst part, Maggie," Walter added, his voice grim, "is that these kinds of moves, they're usually the last step before the person in charge is permanently removed." It wasn't just paranoia. The scheme was so complete, the only thing standing between Thomas and a $100 million empire was me, alive and in my right mind. I left Walter's house with his promise to help me build a case. We agreed I would continue to act as if nothing was wrong, to not give Thomas any reason to suspect I was onto him. The very next day, I put on my best performance. During a brief meeting, I casually brought up one of the properties. "Son, I was thinking about that old warehouse we have over by the waterfront. With all the new development there, maybe we should think about renovating it." I saw a flicker of panic in his eyes before he composed himself. "Oh, Mom, that old place is a money pit. It's practically falling down. I was actually going to suggest we sell it for whatever we can get." "Sell it? But Arthur always said that property was our retirement plan." "So, times change, Mom," he said with that condescending smile I was starting to despise. "Dad didn't understand the new real estate market. That area is a bust." It was a bald-faced lie. The local news was full of stories about the waterfront revitalization project. That land was now worth 10 times what it was when Arthur was alive. "Well, I'd like to see it for myself before we make any decisions. Let's go this afternoon." "I can't today," he said quickly. "I'm booked solid. How about sometime next week?" He was stalling, buying time to figure out his next move. I just nodded, pretending to agree. In the days that followed, he ramped up his campaign to paint me as incompetent. He suggested I take a cruise. "You've worked so hard your whole life, Mom. You deserve a break." He started telling other family members that I seemed tired, that I was forgetting things. He even booked an appointment for me with a neurologist. "I'm just worried about you, Mom. It's normal for memory to slip at your age, but we should just get it checked." It made my blood boil. He was setting the stage to have me declared mentally unfit. My mind was perfectly fine. Too fine for his comfort, apparently. This is one of the cruelest forms of abuse. It's not enough to steal her money. He's trying to steal her identity, her credibility. Thomas is attempting to rewrite the story of who she is, and it's a fight Margaret cannot afford to lose. I went to the appointment anyway. The doctor, a man I'd never met, asked me a series of simple questions and then declared I was showing early signs of cognitive decline. He recommended I step away from all financial decisions. As we left, Thomas put his arm around me. "See, Mom? It's nothing to be ashamed of. I'll handle everything. You just relax." That night, I couldn't sleep a wink. This was more serious than I had imagined. He wasn't just stealing from me. He was trying to erase me. What was next? Having me committed? The next day, I called Walter and told him what had happened. He was deeply concerned. "Margaret, he's building a legal case against you. We need to move faster." We decided I had to document everything, every conversation, every strange occurrence. Walter gave me a tiny digital recorder I could keep in my pocket. "Record it all," he said. "It could be your word against his." It was around then that things at home started getting strange. My keys would disappear from the hook by the door and reappear in the sugar canister. Important papers I left on my desk would be missing. I started to suspect Thomas was coming into the house when I was out, moving things to make me feel like I was losing my mind. It was a wicked, cruel game. I started taking pictures of rooms before I left them, just to prove to myself I wasn't going crazy. My daughter-in-law, Sarah, remained distant. During one of their few brief visits, I tried to gently probe. "Sarah, dear, is Thomas all right? He seems so stressed lately." She wouldn't meet my eyes. "Everything's fine, Margaret. He just works so hard." "And the children? I miss them so. Is there some reason you don't bring them around?" "Of course not," she said, a little too quickly. "It's just, life is so busy." I could tell she was lying. I could see the discomfort in her eyes. Did she know what her husband was doing? Was she a part of it? One day, I dropped by their house unannounced. The nanny let me in, saying Sarah was out shopping. I was waiting in the living room when I heard my grandson, Leo, who was 15, talking in his room. The door was slightly ajar. "I know, Dad, but I feel bad lying to Grandma." "Yeah, I know it's because she's not well." Okay. I won't say anything about the new lake house." "Lake house? What lake house?" My heart hammered in my chest as I listened. "But when can we use it? I get it. Not until Grandma is settled." The betrayal had now spread to the next generation, tainting the one thing she held most dear, her family. This was no longer just about business. It was the methodical dismantling of her entire world, piece by painful piece. How much more could one woman take? A lake house? Thomas didn't have the money for a lake house, not on his salary. Unless... When Sarah walked in and saw me, she nearly dropped her shopping bags. "Margaret, I wasn't expecting you." "I was just missing my grandchildren," I said, keeping my voice even. "Is Leo here? I thought I heard him." "Oh no," she stammered. "He's at a friend's house. He won't be back for hours." She was a terrible liar. I pretended to believe her and left, my heart heavier than ever. My son wasn't just stealing from me. He was teaching his own children to lie for him. How deep did this darkness go? The next day, I went to the county courthouse. As the majority owner of the company, I requested copies of all recent property deeds. The clerk, a woman who had known me for 20 years, looked uncomfortable. "Mrs. Miller, your son was just in here last week and pulled all the same files." "I'd like my own copies," I insisted, "and a record of any recent changes." What I saw made me feel sick. Several properties had already been transferred to TR Investments. The signatures on the documents were supposed to be mine. They were forgeries, good ones, but I knew my own hand. I went home, my mind made up. No more games, no more pretending. It was time for a confrontation. I called him and asked him to come for dinner, to discuss the company's future. He arrived at 7 o'clock, smiling, confident. We made small talk through dinner. Then, with the dessert plates, I laid the copies of the deeds on the table. "Thomas," I said, my voice steady, "can you explain why our company properties are now owned by something called TR Investments?" I watched the color drain from his face. First shock, then anger, then that familiar condescending smile. "Mom, it's just a tax strategy. Complicated business stuff you don't need to worry about." "And these signatures?" I asked, pushing another document towards him. "Why are they on a transfer I never authorized?" He let out a sigh, as if I were a difficult child. You did sign them, Mom. Don't you remember? We went over it right here at this table. Don't you dare lie to me, Thomas, I said, my voice rising. I never signed those papers, and I know damn well what TR stands for. The mask finally shattered, his face twisted with rage. You don't know anything about modern finance. Dad left me in charge because I was the only one smart enough to grow this business. You are holding us back with your old-fashioned sentimentality. Is theft modern, Thomas? Is forgery? Is fraud? He shot up from his chair, knocking his water glass over. You're getting senile. I'm trying to protect our assets, and you're making these wild accusations. So that's your plan? To tell everyone I'm crazy? To have me put away so you can steal everything? No one will believe you, he sneered, his voice dropping to a cold, menacing tone. I have doctors' reports. I have witnesses who will say you've been confused and forgetful. Everyone knows you haven't been the same since Dad died. In that moment, I knew. He would do anything. Absolutely anything to get me out of his way. The fake doctor, the missing keys, pulling the family away from me. It was all part of his plan to destroy my credibility before he destroyed me. Get out, I whispered, holding back a sob. Get out of my house. And know this. I will fight you. I will fight for what Arthur and I built. He laughed, a short, ugly sound that cut me to the core. Good luck with that, old woman. It's my word against yours. Who do you think they'll believe? The successful businessman or his confused, elderly mother? The mask is gone. This is no longer about money. It's a brutal fight for her freedom and her very identity. With his threat, Thomas has just set a new, terrifying clock ticking, and what he does next is colder than she could ever imagine. After he stormed out, I sank into a chair, shaking with a rage so profound it scared me. My son, my beautiful boy, he was gone, replaced by this monster. I had no time for tears. I called Walter immediately. He knows, I said. The confrontation happened. He threatened me. Walter's voice was urgent. Margaret, this is dangerous. If he feels cornered, there's no telling what he'll do. We need to go to the authorities now. We agreed to meet with a lawyer first thing in the morning. I hung up the phone and walked through my house, checking every lock on every door and window. For the first time in 50 years, I felt unsafe in my own home, afraid of my own son. Lying in bed that night, sleep was impossible. My mind raced. How did this happen? Where did I fail him? What turns a person so cold, so greedy, that they would look their own mother in the eye and threaten her? I had no answers. All I knew was that the confrontation had forced his hand. He would no longer wait for me to fade away, and the method he would choose was more cruel and efficient than I could have imagined. A walk-in refrigerator where my screams would be swallowed by the cold. What he didn't count on was that the cold couldn't extinguish the fire inside a stubborn old woman, and that his attempt to end my life would be the very thing that sealed his own downfall. After that terrible night, I knew I was running out of time. Thomas wasn't going to play games anymore. It was war, and in a war, you have to anticipate your enemy's next move. I called Walter before the sun came up. We have to accelerate everything, I said, my voice raw. He basically confessed last night, called me senile, and admitted to the plan. We met an hour later at an all-night diner miles outside the city, a place where no one would know us. Walter had compiled a thick binder of evidence, the forged documents, the bank records, the recordings I had started making. What's the plan, Maggie? He asked, his face etched with worry. We take this to the district attorney. I shook my head. Not just yet. First, I want to expose him in front of the board. I want our people, the people who trusted him, to see the truth with their own eyes. Then we go to the police. We scheduled an emergency board meeting for 2 days' time. It was the perfect stage. All the executives and senior managers would be there, including Samuel, who had secretly been feeding me information from inside the company. He was still officially on his special project, but he had his ways. I left that diner with a heavy heart. I was about to publicly destroy my own son. There was no victory in that, only the grim necessity of it. But I underestimated Thomas's cunning. I still don't know how he found out. Maybe he had someone watching me. Maybe he bugged my phone. Or maybe, and this thought hurts the most, he pressured one of our people to talk. However it happened, he knew I was coming for him, and he decided to strike first. The day before the board meeting, he called me. His voice was completely different. It was soft, apologetic. "Mom, I need to see you. I've been thinking about what you said. You were right. I've been a complete jerk. The pressure of running everything, it's been getting to me." I knew it was a lie, but I played along. "It's good that you realize that, Thomas. We do need to talk." "Yes," he said, his voice dripping with false sincerity. "In fact, could you meet me at the central commissary this afternoon? There's a serious inventory issue in the pastry refrigerator I need your eyes on. After that, we can go somewhere quiet and really talk it out." The commissary? The refrigerator? The alarm bells in my head were deafening, but if I refused, he'd know I suspected something. "All right," I said, keeping my voice casual. "I can be there around 3, but I have another appointment at 5. I had no appointment. I just wanted him to think my time was limited. "Perfect. I'll meet you by the loading docks." I immediately called Walter. He was just as suspicious as I was. "Don't go alone, Margaret. It sounds like a trap." "I know, but if I don't go, he'll know I'm onto him. I have to go, but I'll be prepared." I decided to take Clara with me, our head pastry chef. She was loyal, and her presence would be natural in that setting. I told her I needed her help with a stock issue. At 3 o'clock on the dot, I pulled into the commissary parking lot. It was a massive, windowless building behind our flagship bakery. Michael was waiting for me, smiling, looking relaxed in his work shirt. When he saw Clara get out of the car with me, I saw a flicker of annoyance in his eyes, but he covered it quickly. "Mom, you didn't have to bring Clara. It's just a quick look." "Clara knows the pastry stock better than I do," I said breezily. He hesitated, then shrugged. "All right, the more the merrier." We walked into the cavernous warehouse, the air thick with the smells of sugar and cardboard. Michael led us down a long aisle, talking about logistical problems and supplier delays. He was rambling, killing time. I could feel Clara glancing at me, sensing something was wrong. After a few minutes, we arrived at the back, where the large walk-in refrigerators were located. "The problem is in this main one," Michael said, pointing to the largest door. "The inventory counts are all over the place. Things are getting lost." I peered through the small porthole window. It looked perfectly organized to me, but I had to play my part. "Well, let's have a look," I said, pulling my sweater a little tighter. Michael pulled open the heavy, insulated door. A wave of cold air washed over us. "After you," he said, gesturing us inside. I went first, with Clara right behind me. I had barely taken 2 steps inside when I felt a violent push from behind. At the same instant, I heard Clara scream. I spun around just in time to see my son's face, his expression cold and determined. Before I could react, the heavy door slammed shut with a deafening thud, sealing us inside. That thud, it's not just a sound, it's a final, brutal act. It's a son severing the last thread connecting him to his mother. In that cold, dark prison, Margaret is about to begin the fight of her life, a battle against not just the cold, but against the deepest betrayal imaginable. Let's see if she has what it takes to survive. You think you understand what betrayal is, but then a door clicks shut and you learn a whole new definition. It's the silence that follows, the sudden, chilling realization that the person who was supposed to protect you from the world is the one who just locked you away from it. To make matters worse, the main lights in the refrigerator flickered off, leaving only a dim emergency bulb in the far corner. "Thomas!" I screamed, rushing back to the door, Clara at my heels. We pounded on the thick metal. Through the small window, I could see my son's face. He wasn't smiling. He just looked calm. "What are you doing?" I yelled. "Open this door." He raised his phone to the glass, a message typed on the screen. "Sorry, Mom. It's for the best. No more suffering." My blood turned to ice, and not from the cold. He was doing this. He was leaving us here to die. The temperature inside was kept at 34 degrees Fahrenheit. It wouldn't kill us quickly, but over many hours, hypothermia would be inevitable, especially for someone my age. "He's insane," Clara sobbed, banging her fists against the door. "Help! Somebody help!" I watched Thomas shrug, put his phone away, and walk away. whistling. The last thing I saw was him flicking a switch on the wall, and the lights in the main warehouse went dark. "He shut down the power for this section," Clara whispered, her body already trembling. "The night shift doesn't come back here. No one will find us until morning." I looked at my watch. It was 3:30 in the afternoon. We had to survive for more than 15 hours. It was a death sentence. "We have to keep moving," I said, my voice shaking but firm. "We need to find something to keep us warm." We spent the next few minutes frantically searching. We found a stack of large empty cardboard boxes and some rolls of packing plastic. We huddled together in a corner, tearing the cardboard to put underneath and over us. "We have to stay awake," I told Clara, whose teeth were already chattering. "And we have to keep talking." "Why is he doing this?" she cried. "Why would he want to kill you?" I told her everything. The stolen money, the forgeries, the board meeting I had planned. "He knew I was going to expose him," I finished, my voice weak. "He decided to get rid of me first." "But why me?" she sobbed. The answer was cruel and simple. She was just collateral damage. A witness who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. As the hours crawled by, the cold became a physical entity, a monster gnawing at our bones. My fingers went numb, then my feet. The pain was excruciating. "Tell me about your grandchildren," I said to Clara, trying to keep our minds working. We talked about everything and nothing. We sang old songs. We did multiplication tables in our heads, anything to fight off the lethargy, the sweet, deadly temptation of sleep. At one point, I saw Clara's eyes drooping. "Clara, stay with me," I yelled, shaking her. "If we fall asleep now, we'll never wake up." She jolted awake, her eyes wide with terror. "I'm so tired, Margaret. So tired." "I know, dear," I said, slapping her cheek slightly. "We have to fight." Sometime after 9 o'clock, I started to see things. I saw Arthur, so clearly, standing by a shelf of milk crates, smiling at me. I knew it wasn't real, that my mind was starting to fail, but it was a comfort nonetheless. I saw my mother, my father, scenes from my childhood. "Margaret, who are you talking to?" Clara's voice sounded like it was coming from miles away. I forced myself to focus. Clara was in a bad way. Her lips were turning blue. She was slipping away. "We have to move," I said, my own voice slurring. We tried to stand, to walk, but our legs wouldn't cooperate. We were crawling on the frozen floor, every movement a symphony of pain. That's when I heard it. A muffled voice from outside the door. It was Thomas. "A terrible accident," he was saying to someone. "My mother and an employee are missing. We've looked everywhere." He was putting on a show, pretending to lead a search party, all while knowing exactly where we were. I screamed. I pounded on the door with the last of my strength, but I knew he was keeping everyone away from this area. I crawled back to Clara. She was barely conscious. I felt my own will slipping away. The desire to just close my eyes and let it all end was overwhelming. "No," I whispered to myself. "I will not give him the satisfaction." I found a heavy-duty metal scoop on a shelf. I started banging it against the metal shelving. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short, SOS. It was a faint hope, but it was something to do. An act of defiance against the cold and the dark. The hours blurred together. Midnight came and went. I was barely aware of my own actions, just banging the scoop out of pure, stubborn instinct. My body was numb. I felt nothing. I knew that was a bad sign. Susan was completely unresponsive. I thought she was gone. Then I heard a new sound, a scraping at the door. I thought I was hallucinating again. But then, the handle turned. The door cracked open, letting in a sliver of light and warmer air. In the doorway stood a young man in a janitor's uniform, holding a floor buffer, and just like that, salvation arrived. Not as a knight in shining armor, but as a young man named Marco doing his nightly rounds. It's a humbling reminder, isn't it? That sometimes our greatest deliverance comes not from some grand design, but from one person choosing to listen to that tiny, nagging feeling that something isn't right. It was Marco from the night cleaning crew. "Oh my God," he yelled, seeing us. Help! Somebody, get help in here! The next moments were a chaos of warmth and light. Paramedics, blankets, voices. I remember them saying my core temperature was 81 degrees. Clara's was even lower. They said another 30 minutes and we would have been gone. In the midst of it all, I saw Thomas running towards us, his face a perfect mask of shock and relief. But his eyes gave him away. In them, I saw not relief, but the cold fury of a failed plan. "Mom, thank God!" he cried, rushing to my side. Our eyes met, and in that moment, he knew that I knew. "Monster," was the only word I could manage before they loaded me into the ambulance. The next few weeks were a battle. Severe hypothermia takes a heavy toll. But as I lay in that hospital bed, something inside me had changed. The part of me that was a loving mother had frozen to death in that refrigerator. In its place was something new, something cold and hard and unbreakable. Michael played his part beautifully. He told the doctors, my other children, the police, that it was a tragic accident, a faulty lock. He even hired a lawyer to sue the refrigerator manufacturer. He was the hero who had organized the search party that found us. Only I and Clara, recovering in another room, knew the truth. One afternoon, when we were alone, he leaned over my bed. "Next time," he whispered, a smile on his face for anyone who might be watching. "There won't be a miracle, you stubborn old bitch." In that instant, my path became clear. I wasn't going to be a victim. I would play his game. I would feign weakness. I would let him think he had won. That freezer didn't kill me. It forged me into something stronger. The love for my son was gone, replaced by a cold, clear sense of purpose. Justice. He thought he was looking at a broken old woman. He had no idea he had just created his worst nightmare. A mother's love is a powerful force, but betrayal can be even stronger. What grows in its place is a resolve as cold and unforgiving as the steel of a freezer door. It was at that moment, lying in that hospital bed, that my grief transformed. It crystallized into a single sharp point. I was no longer just a mother. I was a survivor, and I was going to get justice. Justice for Arthur, for Clara, for our family, and for myself. Michael thought the cold had broken me. He had no idea it had simply frozen my resolve into something indestructible. He wanted a war. I was going to give him one. And as my Arthur always said, the best way to win a war is to let your enemy underestimate you. In the hospital, I learned how narrow our escape had been. Maria, the cleaner who found us, wasn't even supposed to be in that part of the commissary that night. Her usual partner had called in sick. "It was fate, Mrs. Miller," she told me, tears in her eyes. I heard the little tapping sound, and something just told me I had to check. If not for a sick employee, if not for her intuition, if not for my stubborn banging, we would have been just another tragic headline. The doctors told me my survival was medically improbable. Below 86 degrees, a young doctor explained, the body's systems begin to shut down. The heart, the brain, it's like a controlled power outage. The fact that you stayed conscious long enough to keep signaling for help is remarkable. That remarkable resilience had a simpler name, rage. In addition to the hypothermia, the cold air had given me a brutal case of pneumonia. For several days, I was on a ventilator, unable to speak. Clara was in a medically induced coma. The doctors worried about brain damage. And through it all, Thomas was the perfect son. He was a constant presence, conferring with doctors, looking worried, accepting condolences. "She's a fighter," he'd tell my other children, Eleanor and Samuel, when they rushed to my bedside. But when he thought no one was looking, when he thought I was too sedated to notice, the mask would slip. The coldness in his eyes, the slight tightening of his jaw. Once I heard him mutter under his breath, "For God's sake, just let go already." That's when my plan began to form. I would use his arrogance as a weapon against him. I started pretending to be more out of it than I was. I would keep my eyes closed, my breathing shallow, whenever he was in the room. After a week, they took the breathing tube out. When the doctor came to assess my mental state, I began my performance. "What year is it, Mrs. Miller?" he asked gently. I looked around, feigning confusion. Is it 1998? I saw Thomas, standing in the corner, visibly relaxed. And do you remember the accident? How you got in the freezer? I shook my head slowly. It's all a blur, just cold. I remember being so cold. It was exactly what he wanted to hear. If I couldn't remember him locking the door, he was safe. I continued the act, pretending to have significant memory gaps around the event. This is quite common with severe hypothermia, the doctor explained to Thomas. The trauma and lack of oxygen can cause partial amnesia. It may or may not return. I could have sworn I saw a small smile play on my son's lips. His star witness was unreliable. In the days that followed, I played the part of a confused but recovering old woman. It hurt to lie to Eleanor and Samuel, but it was crucial that Thomas believe I was no threat. I needed an ally inside the hospital. I found one in Doris, a night nurse in her 50s with wise, knowing eyes. One night, I saw her watching Thomas with a look of deep suspicion. When she came to check on me, I took a chance. "Doris," I whispered, "I need your help, and you have to promise me you won't tell a soul." She just nodded. "I'm not confused," I said. "I remember everything. My son tried to murder me." I expected her to be shocked, but she just nodded again, slowly. "I had a feeling," she said. "The way he talks to you when he thinks you're asleep." I told her the whole story, the stolen money, the plan, everything. "What do you need?" she asked, without a moment's hesitation. "I need a way to record him," I said, "and a secret way to communicate with the outside." The next night, Doris brought me a tiny digital recorder and a cheap, untraceable prepaid phone. "My ex-husband was a monster too," she said. "I know what it's like to not be believed. You go get him." I began to record every conversation. Most of it was just him playing the caring son, but sometimes he would slip up. Thinking I was asleep, I recorded him muttering, "Should have disabled the emergency lights. That was a mistake." On a phone call, I recorded him saying, "No, the old woman doesn't remember a thing, and even if she did, they'd say she was delirious. As soon as she's out of here, I'll take care of it permanently. I have a plan B." Every word was a nail in his coffin. Using the secret phone, I contacted Samuel and Walter. They were horrified but energized. "I'm digging from home," Samuel texted me. "I found 3 more shell corporations. And Mom, he hired a probate lawyer 2 months ago. He was getting ready to inherit." The evidence was mounting, but I needed something more. I needed a confession. The opportunity came when the doctors announced I was well enough to be discharged in a few days. "I've arranged everything, Mom," Thomas said, all smiles. "I've hired a private nurse, and I'm taking you to a beautiful, quiet cabin on the lake to recover, far from all this stress." A lake cabin? We didn't own a lake cabin. He was planning to take me somewhere isolated to finish the job. After he left, I used the burner phone to call his real cell, knowing it would go to voicemail. I left a message, my voice deliberately shaky and confused. "Thomas, honey, it's Mom. I'm a bit mixed up. Which lake cabin are we going to? The one your father and I looked at years ago? I can't seem to recall." Minutes later, he stormed back into the room. "Mom, why are you calling me about the cabin? You know we just bought it." "Oh dear," I said, playing my part. "My memory is like Swiss cheese. Did we use the money from that warehouse sale to buy it?" I saw the color drain from his face. "Who told you about the warehouse sale? You're not supposed to remember that." "I just have flashes," I said, feigning distress. "Bits and pieces." He leaned over the bed, his voice a low hiss. "Listen to me. You don't remember anything. If you start remembering things, what happened in that refrigerator is going to feel like a day at the beach. Do you understand me?" It was all on tape. I told Doris about the plan. "He's going to kill you," she said, her face pale. "You can't go with him." "I don't intend to," I said, "but I need him to think I am." That night, Samuel came to visit, disguised as a hospital volunteer. He brought more news. "Auntie, I got into his work emails. He researched hypothermia extensively for weeks before the incident. He knew exactly how long it would take for a person your age to die in those temperatures." My own son had researched my murder like a science project. "And Susan?" I asked, my voice thick. "She's out of her coma. She's weak, but she's awake, and she remembers everything. The day of my discharge, I played the frail old woman to perfection. Doris helped me into a wheelchair I didn't need. Walter and Samuel will be following you," she whispered. "The phone I gave you has a GPS tracker. We'll know where you are every second." Thomas was all smiles as he wheeled me out of the hospital. "We'll just stop at the house to pick up a few things, then it's off to the lake for some peace and quiet," he said. The drive was tense. I pretended to doze, but I was watching the road signs. We weren't heading toward any lakes I knew of. We were heading deep into the countryside. After nearly 2 hours, he turned onto a deserted dirt road. "Where are we, Thomas?" I asked, feigning a sleepy confusion. "This isn't the way." "It's a shortcut, Mom," he said, not looking at me. We pulled up to a dilapidated, abandoned farmhouse. "This isn't a lake house," I said, my heart pounding. He turned off the engine and looked at me, the mask of the loving sun completely gone. His eyes were cold and empty. "You know, Mom," he said, his voice eerily calm. "I have to hand it to you. You're tougher than I thought. I really thought the refrigerator would do the trick." The recorder in my pocket was running. "What are you talking about?" I whispered. "Let's drop the act," he sneered. "You've been playing me this whole time, haven't you? You remember everything." I sat up straight, my voice clear and strong for the first time in weeks. "Yes, I remember everything. I remember you pushing me. I remember you walking away." "Dad always underestimated me," he spat. "And so did you. This company should have been mine years ago." "And what now?" I asked, my voice steady. "What's your brilliant plan? An accident? A confused old woman wanders off and falls down a well?" He almost smiled. "Something like that. Tragic, really. But then, it'll all finally be over." He's making his final move, so sure of his victory he can't see the checkmate just ahead. Margaret has been playing a different game all along, and the justice she is about to serve is as cold and methodical as his own dark heart. Stick around, because the finale you've been waiting for is finally here. I looked at his face, and for a fleeting second, I saw the little boy I used to read bedtime stories to. A wave of grief, so powerful it almost knocked the wind out of me, washed over me. "It was never about the money, was it?" I asked softly. "It was about your father. You spent your whole life trying to get out of his shadow, and instead you became a darker version of him." For a heartbeat, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Pain. Regret. But it was gone as quickly as it came. "You could have been a king, Thomas," I said quietly. "But you chose this." Just then, the glare of headlights flooded the car. Then another and another. Michael's head whipped around, his face a mask of panic as 2 police cars and Walter's sedan came speeding down the dirt road, blocking us in. "Oh, did I forget to mention?" I said, my voice calm. "I've been recording you. Everything. The threats in the hospital. This little confession right now. And my friends from the police department have been listening to our entire conversation live." He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. "You wouldn't," he whispered. "Your own son." "My son," I said, a single tear finally tracing a path down my cheek, "died for me in that refrigerator. You're just the man who took his place." Justice was swift, but there was no celebration. When the police led him away in handcuffs, they took the last remnants of my boy with them. They took the memory of his first steps, his high school graduation, the father he was to my grandchildren. They took the part of a mother's heart that never stops hoping, and that is a theft that no court can ever make right. The cars surrounded us, their lights flashing in the twilight. Sheriff Brody, an old friend of Arthur's, walked up to my window. "Are you all right, Margaret?" I just nodded, unable to speak. Michael looked at me one last time before they put him in the cruiser. There was no anger in his eyes, just a strange, hollow look of defeat. "You always were smarter than all of us," he said. "No, Thomas," I whispered to the empty car after he was gone. "You were just more broken than I ever knew." The days that followed were a blur of lawyers and depositions. The recordings were undeniable. The case was airtight. The rest of my family was devastated. How do you explain to your children that their brother tried to murder their mother? There are no words for that kind of wound. The business world was abuzz with scandal, but I refused to be seen as a victim. While the legal system dealt with Thomas, I had a company to save. 2 months after his arrest, still recovering, I walked back into the office. I called a company-wide emergency meeting. I stood before them all, not as a frail old woman, but as the founder of the company. I laid out the truth, all of it, the embezzlement, the lies, the attempted murder. There were gasps, there were tears, but there was also a sense of relief. The poison had finally been lanced. I fired every single person who was complicit in Thomas's schemes, from the board members down to the accountants. I promoted the loyal ones, the good people he had marginalized. We rebuilt from the ashes. It was the hardest work of my life. Thomas was sentenced to life in prison. I visited him once. I needed to ask him why. He looked at me through the glass, a stranger in my son's body. "Because you wouldn't die," he said. "You were going to live forever, and I was tired of waiting for my turn." I never went back. That was a year ago. Today, the company is stronger than ever. We brought Samuel back to the main office, and he's a natural leader. We're honest. We're transparent. We're a family again. People ask me how I survived, how I found the strength to fight back. The truth is, I don't know. There's no secret. When life locks you in a freezer, you have 2 choices. You can lie down and let the cold take you, or you can get angry. You can fight. You can bang on the walls until your knuckles bleed and pray that someone, somewhere, hears you. I chose to fight, and every day I wake up and I choose it again. My story is a hard one, but I tell it for a reason. Because somewhere out there, someone else might be feeling trapped in the cold, feeling like their world is closing in. And I need you to know that even in the darkest, coldest places, there is always a flicker of fire inside you. You just have to be stubborn enough to keep it alive. Thank you for listening to my story today. I tell a new one every single day, so if you want to hear more tales of survival and the strength of the human spirit, make sure you follow along and click that little bell so you don't miss tomorrow's story. I promise it will be worth your while.